Casey's biggest hits.
A year ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was One Last Cry by a singer who grew up in a family where music was as important as food. They sang together in one way or another 7 days a week. For the past 3 generations, the McKnight family has lived for music. Brian McKnight's grandfather was a renowned gospel singer and church soloist. His mother and father followed in his footsteps, singing with several different choirs. And that love of music was transferred to their children. When they weren't singing in church, they sang at home after dinner every single day, just for the sheer love of it. Brian's brother Claude is a member of the Grammy-winning gospel group Take 6. And a year ago this week, Brian himself had one of the biggest hits in the USA, One Last Cry.
My shattered dream. Casey's biggest hits.
2 years ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was One Last Cry by an artist who says he wasn't looking for a career in music. He was just in it for fun. And then a deal came out of the blue. Brian McKnight was a student at Oakwood College in Alabama studying computer science. In his spare time, he'd get together with a friend to write songs. They thought the songs were pretty good, so they did a demo of them, and they sent it off to a few record companies to see what they'd say. They didn't expect a response at all. But not only did they get a response, Brian was offered a chance to do some writing professionally with the option of recording his own music. And that unexpected deal led to one of the biggest hits in the USA 2 years ago this week.
American Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the latest hit for a singer who says he learned to sing sitting in his mother's lap while she sang in the church choir. Brian McKnight grew up in a family where he was steeped in music, especially in gospel. He says, quote, "The church where I grew up was the Emmanuel Temple in Buffalo, New York. I'm the 5th generation in a family of Seventh-day Adventists and the youngest of 4 brothers. At age 4, I learned to sing seated on my mother's lap in the alto section of the choir." Brian says his mother was a great singer and a fine gospel pianist as well. He says in the church, his grandfather was a minister of music. He says the effect on him was incredible. Quote, "The choir was a cappella. The voices were awesome. I can still hear the harmonies in my head." Brian says music was such a part of his life that when he was still very young, he formed a gospel quartet with his 3 older brothers. He says the McKnight brothers were serious singers. The reputation went out, these boys could shout. Well, 20 years later, the music that inspired Brian McKnight back then still inspires him today. It's the foundation of his sound. Here's Brian McKnight with Anytime.
American Top 40.
Now we're up to Back at One, a love song with a title inspired by an instruction manual. It's both the title of the latest album by singer Brian McKnight and the name of the first hit from that album. The title, Back at One. A title that sounds a little, well, cosmic, but actually it's very down to earth. You see, a few months ago, Brian McKnight was having a home theater installed in his house, the kind with all the high-tech components like a DVD player and surround sound. While the technician was busy putting all the pieces together, Brian browsed through the instruction manual. He says it had the step-by-step instructions. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do that. And then Brian noticed that after giving all the steps, the manual said that if the thing didn't work, you should repeat the steps. Go back to 1. He says he thought that was an interesting idea for a song. Quote, "I made Back at One a step-by-step manual for staying in love with somebody, telling them how you feel about them." And this week, step by step, Brian McKnight is moving up the chart. He steps up 4 notches to number 9 in this week's survey with his hit, Back at One.
It's undeniable. Number 12.
Slipping 2 notches is producer, singer, and songwriter Brian McKnight. Brian says one goal he has yet to accomplish is to score an entire motion picture. Considering Brian's track record, there's little doubt he'll accomplish that goal too. Here he is singing his latest hit, Back at One.
Counting down the hits with Casey Kasem.
I'm Ed McMann in this week for Casey Kasem. And falling 2 notches to number 38 this week on American Top 40 is Brian McKnight. With many successful songs and albums under his belt, Brian remembers the best advice he ever received was, quote, "You can't learn anything with your mouth open," unquote. But you sure can sing when it's open. Singing his big hit 6-8-12, here's Brian McKnight.
I'm Casey Kasem, counting them down on American Top 40. Falling 6 notches is Brian McKnight with a song from his latest CD, Superhero, a record that Vibe magazine described as a confident step to the left of R&B's center, hip and risky. Being successful is one thing. Now he's starting to get interesting. Unquote. Here's Brian McKnight at number 33 with Still.